If you're just getting into reptiles, you might be thinking to yourself, do I want a lizard or do I want a snake? And there's a million different options out there. Today we're going to go over why you might want a lizard and why you might want a snake. I'm Adam, this is Pikachu, you're watching Wicked's Wicked Reptiles, stick around. We're going to try this video in 4K, so if you don't mind the face hunting and you don't mind the close-ups, Pikachu here, let's get started. There are several differences between lizards and snakes, obviously. Snakes and lizards don't even really look a lot alike unless we're talking about legless lizards, which we're not. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. There's a few things you want to consider. Size is definitely one of them. If you want something that takes up a little bit of space or a lot of space, if it gets big or if it doesn't. And it's really varied. And the entire video, we're going to talk in generalities because, I mean, there's always outliers. So in general, this is what you want to think about in terms of size. A snake like Pikachu is a very small snake. I mean, in terms of pythons, ball pythons, which is what he is, by the way, albino if you haven't noticed, they are, you know, pretty average size. They get between 4 and 6 feet on average. Where if you get a lizard that got between 4 and 6 feet, we're talking about a monitor lizard at that point, most likely, maybe a tegu, something like that. So you're going to find a lot longer specimens for snakes most of the time, right? For example, like a bearded dragon is something that would take the same size enclosure as Pikachu, or relatively similar anyway, but they're not going to get nearly as big. Bearded dragon, if you got a 3-foot bearded dragon, we're talking about a big specimen, right? Maybe 4 feet, including the tail, whatever. But with Pikachu, 4 feet's pretty small, and he's a male, and he's 4 feet long. So, in general, you're going to see snakes getting bigger in terms of length, a little bit more robust to the lizard sometimes, depending, right? A leopard gecko will never get the size of a corn snake, never mind, or a hognose snake, never mind someone like Pikachu here. So for size, do you want a bigger animal or do you want a smaller animal? That's really what it comes down to. Snakes will almost always be bigger. So I'm going to give it a tie, 1-to-1, one for lizards and one for snakes. Now, where it gets a little bit tricky is enclosures, because you do want a bigger enclosure most of the time for lizards of the same size as the snake, whose enclosure won't be the same size. That made sense, I think, right? Pikachu's going to need something like a 55-gallon, where with a bearded dragon, I would say at least a 75-gallon. I think, of course, ball pythons are probably better off in 75s anyway, but you can get away with a small ball python in a 55-gallon, where there's no adult bearded dragon, in my opinion, that could be suitable in a 55-gallon for its entire life. They're going to move around a lot more, lizards will, right? They're going to be a little bit more curious as well. We'll get into the behavior a little bit later, but in general, they need more enrichment, in my opinion. And the substrate is something you want to consider more too, because although snakes can get impaction, that is something that is definitely possible. It's more common with lizards. So you want to take into account the substrate that is on the floor of the enclosure a little bit more closely with a lizard than you would with a snake. And extra stuff in the enclosure as well. With lizards, they both like to hide. Snakes and lizards both like to hide, but snakes in general are going to be a little bit more lackadaisical when they're moving around the enclosure, especially if they're comfortable with you. There's exceptions to every rule, but in general, I mean, if you're going to scare someone like my buddy Bob here, the jeweled lacerda, he's going to go flighting, is that a word? He's going to go scurrying away, where if I come into the room accidentally and I see, I don't know, Franny the boa constrictor or one of the ball pythons, they just kind of look at me and continue on what they're doing. Of course, then I do have a corn snake as well, which scurries as well. So it really depends. Either way, I think that the enclosure is easier to set up and generally going to be smaller, depending on the size of the animal for snakes, so I'll give them a point there. 2 for snakes and 1 for lizards. So far, it's been kind of a toss-up, right? I mean, it can go either way, but where it really gets different is with lighting. Now, I always put these head-to-heads. I'll put heat and humidity along with lighting, but heat and humidity totally depends on the type of snake or lizard, and I can't put a generality around it, right? I mean, they could be completely different, they could be completely the same, but one thing that is true, UVB light, which I did a video about right here if you want to take a look at it, isn't needed by all lizards. Yes, it is enriching and it can be supplied to all lizards and it definitely has a benefit, but we're talking about a small, tiny benefit It's not needed for all lizards, but it's not needed for any snakes that I know of. Now, there are some studies out there. I even read something that they think maybe hognose snakes might need a UVB light just because the calcium production, like sometimes their eggs aren't calcified and they do better under UVB light, but I don't know what the control group was there. I feel pretty comfortable saying that no snakes need a UVB light, so that's going to be kind of the big difference between the snakes and the lizards and the light, heat, humidity thing there. So lizards, like Littlefoot here, who helps me with a lot of the videos, can be more expensive. Actually, Littlefoot's not a great example at all because she doesn't need UVB light. I mean, if you want to supply it, enrichment, of course, so you're going to have a little bit of extra cost with things like bearded dragons, for example, or jeweled lacerdas, or our Sudan plated lizards. There's a bunch of different lizards that do need a UVB light. There may be a little bit of extra cost with a lizard or some lizards compared to snakes, which is something you're going to want to take into account. So I'm going to give that one to snakes just because it's a little bit easier and it's more consistent. So if you're keeping track, snakes with 3 and only 1 for lizards. And just before we move on to diet and behavior and things like that, thanks everyone for buying one of these Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles shirts. I sold a few this week. All the money's going back to the animals and being able to revamp cages and add extra stuff like we're talking about here to make their lives a little bit better. So thank you very much for supporting the channel and for rocking some Wiccan's Wicked Reptile gear. Now, diet is where the two really separate, and there's very little that kind of goes together with these two. And what I mean by that is snakes will eat generally the same thing over and over. You can always vary things up. For example, in general with the diet, snakes are easier. I'll just come out and say it. Because with lizards, it's a lot more varied diet. Like, for example, Littlefoot here. She's going to eat insects, only insects, but she could eat things like dubia roaches, worms of all sorts, silkworms, mealworms, superworms, crickets, all sorts of different things, and they need different things to keep healthy, and a supplementation as well. They need D3, they need calcium, right? So with snakes, I don't really know of any snake that needs a supplementation or a diet that would have to have supplements put on top of it, and generally, they're going to eat rodents. I mean, there are differences, right? I mean, like garter snakes, for example, you should feed them rodents, but they can also eat fish and worms and stuff like that. But in general, rodents are pretty common when it comes to feeding your pet snake. So it's going to be a lot easier because it's just, you know, stock your freezer if your snake can eat frozen thawed, which I always recommend, by the way. And that's it. You just thaw them out, you feed them, and that's it. But with lizards, it's a little bit more often that you have to feed them as well, and that means more often they're going to have to poop, so you're going to have to clean up more poop. You might have to go to the grocery store to facilitate it, like bearded dragons, for example. They're going to eat vegetables along with their insects, so it's more varied. It's a little bit more to consider. It takes more time consuming. It's more fun in some ways to watch them eat though, right? Like Littlefoot kind of going after like insects is pretty cool, or they hunt around. Bearded dragons, when I had bearded dragons, it was so much fun to watch them scurry along to catch the crickets. Although it is fun to watch snakes eat too. I mean, they swallow things whole and they kind of walk their jaws along and they strike out really fast. But in general, it's easier and less often that you have to feed snakes, you know, depending on the size and what species they are, and less poop to clean up as well. So, I mean, I'm going to give this one to snakes again. So 4 for snakes and 1 for lizards. And behavior. We're going to get into morphs and availability in a second, but behavior is really the last really big thing to consider, because if you want a pet, you're going to want to know what it behaves like. And do you want something that will literally just sit in your hand and kind of try to Spider-Man between your hands apparently? Or do you want something that's going to be flighty and crazy, right? And it depends. And there's individuals, of course. A lot of people who have corn snakes say that, oh, they're just cool, it chills out on my head. I have not had that interaction with corn snakes. All the ones I've ever had are flighty and really hard to handle. But all leopard geckos, I've never really heard of too many examples of leopard geckos that are crazy and they kind of move around a lot. So the behavior, I think, is a little bit more predictable with lizards. And with snakes, it's, I don't know, they just feel a little bit more cold towards their owners. And there's no science that backs this up. This is just my experience and my opinion. But with snakes, it's just, I don't know, it doesn't feel like they're bonding, and chances are with lizards, they're probably not bonding with you either, but at least it kind of feels like there's something there, like a little bit of a connection, you know? But I always have my eyes on the sharp end of a snake, where with certain lizards, you know, this guy or Irwin or Bob. And in general, I think it takes less time to tame down certain lizards. Maybe it's just because you feel more comfortable with them. For example, Franny has been a work. It's been a lot of work to get her to a place where, you know, we can tame her down and hold her even without feeling like she's gonna bite us in the face. Where with other snakes like Pikachu, I don't know, I feel pretty confident with him. I have him out for the videos all the time, and you know, didn't really take a lot of work. He's just really chill, just a cool dude. So finally, we get to give a point to lizards, 2 for lizards and 4 for snakes. Last but not least, we'll give out 2 points just to give you a glimpse of hope that maybe that snakes won't run away with this, but price, availability, and morphs. And with this, it totally depends. Price and availability, I mean, like, there's no way I can compare snakes as a general and lizards as a general, right? It totally depends. But in terms of morphs, I mean, with leopard geckos, there's tons of different morphs, right? With blue-tongued skinks, there's several different morphs. But with snakes, there's more options that have more morphs, in my opinion. So if you want, you know, a reticulated python that looks like a cow, or if you want one that looks yellow, you can have that. If you want a ball python that is pied, and also, I mean, there's lace monitors that are pied, of course, right, or they look that way. Or if you want a ball python that is completely black or completely white, you have those options. And with lizards, it's harder to find that. So in my opinion, you just get more bang for your buck, or at least if you want to get into breeding projects, there's more available to you, or even just a collection, there's more available with snakes than there are with lizards. Again, totally general and opinion-based, this whole video, right? So, I mean, if I have to score it, 5 for snakes and 2 for lizards, but even though I scored it that way, I kind of like lizards better. I don't know. I don't think snakes are creepy. I mean, I've had snakes for a long time, but with lizards, they got 4 legs and they got a tail. Like, I don't know, like dogs have 4 legs and a tail. I don't know. It's just, they got external ears, you know, their eyelids sometimes close. How many times can I say you know during this segment? I just think that lizards are my preference, but it's a preference thing, right? My favorite color is red. Maybe yours is purple. I don't know. So there you go. My incoherent rambling list, head-to-head, lizards versus snakes. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I took this video out of the comment section in a video before. All the ideas that I ever do come from the comment section, so put it in there if you'd like to see a video about what you thought about. And if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. Because I do videos twice a week, that means that I'm going to see you on Monday.